Howdy everybody, we're back with some RPG horror stories. Let's jump right into it. So our first story is from user Idlandor5 and is titled Greedy Monk Kept Secretly Stealing the Party's Loot and the DM went along with it for a long time. Alright, so this was a long time ago. It still kind of baffles me and I'm not 100% sure about the specifics of how the monk managed to pull this off. I've tried to explain this as best as I could. Part 1. Game information. It was an online game of D&D 5e primarily played through voice chat. I was invited to the game by an online friend who was friends with the DM. The rest of the party was filled up by players who responded to the DM's game ad. This was also a higher level campaign. I think we started at about level 8 and the DM was very generous with XP. The problem player was playing a Tabaxi monk. He was kind of a douche and also the type of min-maxer who would keep talking about how awesomely his character is designed, how we can't even compare, and he would lord it over us from time to time. Still, his douchey tendencies were tolerable, or so we thought. For the longest time, the DM knew better. Monk also has many thief-type skills and kept bragging about how he's so fast that no one could catch him. He always insisted on going everywhere first to scout and sometimes just rushed into danger with the rest of the party having to catch up to him. A few times this got him into trouble. We had to save him and he always whined that he should have been able to get out of it by himself whenever that happened. When we were in town or any kind of civilization, he'd also sometimes go off on his own. We didn't think much of it. The DM occasionally roleplayed separate scenes for each player character whenever there was need for it, and the rest of our characters also sometimes went off on their own errands. Monk's character was also the type of insufferable lone wolf, so none of us really wanted to roleplay any more than necessary and thus didn't inquire further. Okay, Tabaxi Monk can end up being super fast. It's a bit of a meme in the D&D community that they are basically Sonic the Hedgehog when they dump all of the various abilities they have into like one set of sprinting. I can understand being very excited about a well-built character, but don't lord over the rest of the table too much. I also know and have dealt with the lone wolf player type. From the DM's perspective, they can be a pain in the ass and are something that would need to be kept in line quite rigorously. In the right circumstances, these can be an interesting character. You start out as a lone wolf, you go in recklessly and learn ultimately that you end up needing a party to survive because you're getting your ass beat. Something that if you wanted to proceed with as a player, you need to talk with your party and DM about, because if you're constantly jumping ahead and fucking yourself over because of that PC stupidity, that will end up getting old quick for everybody. But hopefully the DM in this situation is kind of keeping the split party dynamics to a minimum, but this is a horror story, so I think that's quite unlikely. Part 3, Trouble is Brewing. The trouble began when the DM seemingly began to be very stingy with loot. It has been steadily growing worse and worse over the course of a few sessions. Soon enough, we'd fight through a whole dungeon and see that about half the treasure chests and such would only be about half full or even completely empty, as if someone pilfered them. There also were no magic items found by us for several sessions. Before that, we find at least one per session, even if it was a small one that was just mostly for flavor. It was a very high magic setting. I thought the DM simply decided to be a lot more strict with loot, so I didn't say anything. At one point, we were fighting an undead warlord who stole the ancestral sword of my character's family, but when we got through his castle into the treasury, the sword wasn't there, and again, half the treasure chests were empty. I thought it was simply a plot hook, and the DM will follow back on the sword's real whereabouts later, so despite the initial disappointment, I didn't give it much thought. The next session, we were supposed to go to some forgotten temple and retrieve some artifact from there. We went inside, as usual. Monk went to scout first. The DM announced to us that we hear the monk scream in pain. The monk seemed confused by this, and as soon as we got inside the room the monk was in, DM narrated we could see a large statue of the goddess whose temple it is. Underneath it is a large ornate chest, and there are some runic letters on that chest. And in front of said chest was the monk, now turned into a gold statue. The monk was furious, started an argument with the DM, and it got heated. They eventually took it to a private chat, and unsurprisingly, Monk was out of the game not long after that. I was just mostly confused by what just happened. Okay, from the sounds of this, it sounds like DM was allowing Monk to steal from the party in a separate solo session or via some sort of private chat. I could understand an interesting plot hook where something that isn't another player is stealing loot from the party before they get to the treasure room. But you need to have clues and you need to follow up on it so as not to fuck over your players too much. Here it sounds like the DM got tired of Monk's bullshit, but instead of just talking about how they shouldn't be stealing from the party, they just went along with it for the most part and then decided to do something about it. When you have problem players that want to steal from the party and you are not running a campaign where this is talked about and approved, you should just put your foot down and just not allow it. I personally have had issues in a previous campaign where PCs were stealing from one another. A horror story I think I will end up telling sometime. I've been vocal since then in my campaigns that players need to be relatively equal when they're splitting the loot and need to be willing to share with each other. that essentially stealing from each other unless for some discussed above table reason that everybody deems valid, it isn't allowed otherwise. I'm glad to hear the DM set up consequences for Monk's actions, but to me, this seems a little too late, you know? So, part 4, the DM reveal. The DM then explained to us what was written on the chest was a warning that only those blessed by the goddess can open said chest, and anyone else will be cursed. He also told us that the monk was apparently stealing from the party for the longest time, in the sense that he was looting treasure from the dungeon whenever he went ahead and keeping some of it for himself. At first it was apparently small stuff like some gold pieces here or there or an item that looked interesting. Then he'd present the rest of the treasure chest contents to the party while keeping his hidden stash and several bags of holding he had. We were all allowed to spend starting gold on magical items with price based on their rarity. Sometimes he'd apparently even, quote, lock the treasure chest after he took what he wanted from it to make it seem like it was just discovered. He'd communicate these secret actions with the DM through direct messages, and for the longest time, the DM just kept indulging him. The DM was very into simulationist approach. He said he didn't want to limit others' actions too much and just wanted to make sure that they have, quote, realistic consequences. That's the best way I can explain why the DM kept it up for as long as he did, as I don't really understand why myself. The few sessions where we kept suspiciously finding empty chests were after he started being much less subtle and went overboard, taking more things than before, including some magic items the DM meant for a particular character that the monk just couldn't even use. He apparently mostly sold what he looted in town or buried it somewhere to presumably pick it up later. The DM seemed to hate Monk by that point. He kept ranting about him and how insufferable he was, and by that point we all agreed. Apparently during their secret conversations, the monk kept arguing with the DM about what he's able to do without the rest of the party knowing or not, with such notable quotes as, "It's not fair. I have so much speed that I should be able to loot the whole corridor before they even get there." We got to see what was inside those bags of holding he carried, and there were still several magic items in there, one of said items being the ancestral sword of my character's family. Yes, he stole that one too. The DM wanted to teach Monk a lesson, and that trap chest that turned him into a gold statue was meant to be it. For what the DM told us, it wasn't meant to be permanent, and the goddess whose temple he wanted to steal from would have turned him back after a few hours and given him a chance to seek redemption. But the monk left the game, so it was turned into a permanent thing. The DM should have been making the monk talk about what they found, or there should have been clues that he was sneaking off to bury treasure if they were going to allow this for some reason. Also, as a DM, I feel like we're getting to an insane point if a PC has 3+ bags of holding on just themselves. Like, how is this monk going to plaid when it comes to speed if he has 3+ duffel bags just strapped all over his body? Personally, I am always a little bit wary when my players are DMing me secret actions they'd like to take. Not because I don't trust them, but I always need to keep in mind, one, they're telling me this secretly for a reason, either because it's a surprise coming up for the party, or they're not maybe necessarily sure the rest of the party will agree with it and maybe are trying to test the waters with me initially. But me, when this ends up happening to me, I always try to keep in mind the consequences that can or will end up occurring for the party at large if I allow these secret actions to occur. I'm glad the DM finally created consequences for Monk's actions. They clearly are a shitty player, thinking they can get away with this shit because they're fast as fuck. But the DM is also shitty for allowing what I'm going to essentially boil down to PvP. This monk scouting ahead should have made him run into enemies to fight, and they should have been getting down because they should be the only one fighting a fight that's meant for an entire party. I'm sure certain tables would be okay with PCs stealing from one another, but if I was an adventurer and I found out another party member in my party was stealing my paycheck, basically, that I was putting my life on the line for, and they took my family's ancestral sword, they'd either be in a shallow grave on the side of the road, or they would, at the very kindest, be kicked out of the party in universe. As someone at the table, I would be really pissed to find out another player was stealing loot. It would irk me the wrong way. I would have to have a serious discussion. I may even consider leaving the table, potentially depending on how bad it is. 5. Conclusion. The rest of us were not that surprised, as Monk seemed to be the kind of guy to do a thing like this. The monk was also particularly insufferable the last 3 sessions prior, and we were overall just glad he was gone from the game and happy to continue without him. And the game did improve afterwards. That whole situation did leave a bitter taste in my mind, though, mostly in hindsight, knowing that the DM knew about that for so long and indulged him for so long without telling us about it. I'm not even sure how exactly he managed to keep it secret from the rest of the party. And the monk wasn't the only one who had his own, quote, secret plot line. I remember that the sorcerer was heir to some kingdom, which he kept secret from us, and was using the party to get strong and rich enough to help him win his throne back from the usurper. But, as far as I know, he wasn't stealing from the party, nor acting against us in any other way, unlike the monk. I don't want to make it seem like I'm criticizing the DM too much, as he was great otherwise, but I don't think this was handled well. I wish he had just had a chat with him to cut the sort of behavior sometime early on and booted him out of the game if he continued doing it. I agree. This would leave a bitter taste in my mouth as well. I would recommend to all players, when you are in Session 0 or you're meeting a new DM for the first time, if you happen to be joining a table mid-campaign, ask questions. Ask if PvP is a thing. Note that if you're interested in that, or ask if PCs are allowed to steal from each other. Again, note if this is something you're interested in your PC being able to do. Asking questions like this so you don't end up in situations where you're getting fucked over in secret or end up in a situation you're not enjoying what's happening. Read any of the stories where the DM/players are trying to involve party members in their oddly erotic roleplay. Edit. To make something clear, we did ask questions in character when it seemed relevant. Tried to investigate a bit to see if there was something fishy going on, mainly towards the end, but didn't learn much, so we moved on. Our party wasn't that good at the relevant skills except for the monk, which is why we didn't really protest when he always wanted to scout. When it came to that castle treasury and the missing sword, we did try to investigate, but there weren't really any clues left there, at least none that the DM would let us find. So we ended up assuming that the sword was somehow stolen from there years ago for all we knew. We had no real leads going forward with it, so we put it on the back burner and focused on something else, figuring that a lead might present itself sometime in the future. And we all had side RP. That wasn't anything unusual. Monk had more of it. Again, not strange since he kept acting like the lone wolf, and if we didn't feel obligated to let him stay for out-of-game reasons, our characters probably wouldn't have let him remain in our group, as he was just kind of generally shady as a character. I feel that part of the issue was a difference of expectations between us and the DM. Again, expectations are important, and you need to be discussing them as soon as possible when you're getting into a campaign. These also should continue throughout a campaign when new situations occur, and the party and DM should always aim to be flexible where they can. Obviously, everybody has a line in the sand on certain things: romance, drug use, how extensive the violence is, evil characters, whatever. There's a lot more going on in the game besides monks stealing some of our loot. This resulted in us being much more interested in different things and focusing on them rather than the mystery of some empty treasure chests and missing loot. If it continued, then we'd start paying more attention to it, but after Monk went overboard with this, it didn't last long enough for us to make it a priority. DM was fond of sprawling dungeons with multiple routes. Monsters or enemies would be scattered all about, patrolling or just living whatever life they had, and the prospective treasure could be anywhere. If it wasn't just treasure chests, it could be coffins or urns or whatever made sense to him. So there was enough for Monk to grab if he explored the side passages and such. I mean, I gotta ask, if it's a sprawling dungeon and loot is scattered everywhere, did they just sit in the dungeon for hours while the monk kind of went shopping ahead? And if it was scattered, the monk should have had difficulty gathering so much of it. Personally, I do think this DM was probably being a bit too nice with investigation DCs for this monk and how much they're allowed to get away with when they were looting. The strange thing is I don't even remember the monk being split from our group that much. Like, we'd finish a combat encounter, then loot whatever the enemies had on them. The monk generally only looted enemies that seemed like they were either important or could have some cool stuff on them, or engaged in some post-battle roleplay and such. Meanwhile, the monk would leave to scout as soon as the battle was over and rejoin us soon after, telling us what he found. I think the DM was kind of lenient with him and let him accomplish more than he should have been able to, probably because Monk kept whining whenever something didn't go his way. By the time the golden statue incident happened, the DM seemed to dislike him even more than the rest of us. Okay, yes, that DM was being way too lenient. There is only so much one can do in a 6-second round of time. If you as a DM have PCs trying to really stretch what they can do in a scouting mission or combat turn, talk it out. Keep them in line. For example, the monk wants to stealthily scout ahead and loot. Cool. You can only loot so much while keeping quiet and not getting caught by the guards, monsters, etc. Do you want to loot more and very much end up in a battle, or do you want to loot less and be stealthy? Personally, I don't care if you're a Tabaxi monk that can move at Mach fuck, there is only so much one can do in a turn. I would be wary of continuing to play with this DM personally. I know mistakes happen, but I would be very concerned to make sure that all expectations are laid out as soon as possible and that discussions about these continue onward into the campaign. Our next story is from user BusyArt9655 titled, "You Could Use the Plastic Shelves to Stop Them." I was playing Vampire the Masquerade with friends and a paid storyteller. The campaign started good and started getting worse in quality, and I, just like the rest of them, only kept playing because we really cared for our characters that we had been playing for almost a year and a half. Okay, I'm gonna just jump in here real freaking quick. If I was paying for a game, if you're having fun, I guess continue, but if you're paying for a campaign and the quality sucks, why are you paying for it? You're paying for a product/experience, so you should be getting your money's worth personally, and if it's going downhill in quality, maybe mention something or consider not paying for it anymore. That's just me, though. In the end, we were already pretty strong. My vampire, for example, had an army of modified zombies, including something like a Big Daddy from Bioshock. Kind of cool. A friend was already a Ravnos Primogen. Anyway, we went from a bunch of weak neonates to Anciliae so strong we rivaled elders. But the story didn't deal with this power creep, even though we gave him advice, and he didn't want us to switch characters, because from the moment we did, we would leave the campaign, which was already pretty bad. Another session day, we had been put in a situation where a horde of about 20 newly embraced vampires ended up attacking us. And the NPC that was supposed to help with the mission, one of the many of the storyteller's favorite NPCs, literally bailed on us. Okay, so for those unaware, the DM or GM in Vampire the Masquerade is called the Storyteller. Personally, I don't know a ton about this system, but from the sounds of it, this is definitely kind of a situation where power creep hasn't been kept in check too well. My knowledge of Vampire the Masquerade kind of comes from the older games that have been out there, and there was also the Battle Royale that came out a couple years ago on PC and a bunch of other systems and whatnot. There was me, practically a war necromancer. I had Fortitude, Oblivion 5, Celerity 4, Potence 3, Aspects 5, Blood Potency 3, and was about to develop my own discipline. Yes, the storyteller didn't control XP properly either. Besides me, the characters of my friends were a Ravnos, a Salubri, a Malk, and an old clan Zimchi. All strong, but not exactly resistant due to how much I had invested in combat. Our first instinct was to throw a grenade and kill the incoming horde, and the storyteller made a point of narrating that they all jumped over the explosion in sync and funneled us into the basement. Which is funny because the scene he narrated, he didn't seem like we were in a basement, but on the ground floor of a factory. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I don't understand most of those stats, so I'm gonna pretend they're very impressive. Now, I've had issues in the past properly describing the scene, so my players end up being confused as to what the place actually looks like. I'm gonna be honest, it can be kind of annoying, but it's also very understandable. So you as the DM or storyteller have an idea in your mind, and you're trying to convey that to multiple people that are then trying to picture that in their mind. And while that's happening, you have people trying to react and do things or ask follow-up questions, or you're trying to set up what is going to end up happening soon. Handling these situations takes patience. If need be, don't be afraid to stop what is happening and re-describe the scene. This could potentially change player actions. So for example, when I go to re-describe stuff or I am talking about a scene, I always try to reiterate important details to describe the area, just so at least they have a basic idea of the layout. Mention if there's multiple floors, maybe the size of the cavern, what's its general shape, stuff like that. Anyway, the monsters started coming and it got ridiculous because there were like 7 monsters hitting me, 8 on the Malk, and the rest scattered. As they hit, more came. We tried to argue that in vampire lore this wouldn't happen because these newly embraced would beat the shit out of each other. Besides, the way he narrated it would be impossible for more than one of those vampires to hit us. But the storyteller was openly not caring and playing the encounter badly. Okay, so depending on how the encounter was described, this could either be a bad description in the player's minds, but also sometimes I think players need to just kind of go with the flow on stuff. If you think that X should not happen due to lore or whatever, there is a chance that it is going to end up actually being true and happen because Y new thing is entering the lore. The DM is going to change things up. This can help keep the game fresh, as long as it doesn't break the reality of the game too much. And it can help, as a player, to just be very open to these changes. Like, yes, you may know as a player that trolls are, vulnerable to fire. The DM, to make combat more interesting, may have you fight a troll that is not vulnerable to fire and may actually heal on fire damage. Don't complain necessarily, because that's just them changing up everything to make it more interesting. Just roll with it. It could be fun. Anyway, we got out of that situation thanks to the Salubri. Only after thinking about it post-session and sending our feedback, we started to see how ridiculous it was. One of the arguments was, there were shelves on the walls. You could have used shelves? Like, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like plastic shelves would hold back a frenzied vampire horde. He also hadn't let our characters prepare, removed any NPC support, even though the NPC was interested in this case. He literally neutralized any use of our disciplines and then kept arguing that looks like your combo can't save you, even though I never min-maxed. I just had so much XP over time. And besides that, he made a point of neutralizing everyone somehow in the room and teleporting us to the basement. Okay, so personally, this sounds like a situation where the storyteller has had some issues balancing encounters and way overtuned it in order to make it more difficult. Or it's a situation where the storyteller was looking to gotcha the party due to being so strong, or a situation where they were just not describing everything well and the storyteller got mad that the party was just not getting it. It could also be a mix of all of these things. It's kind of funny that the storyteller was expecting them to use shitty retail shelving to stop vampires, because personally I would assume garlic, crosses, and holy water would be pretty good deterrents, but I guess retail shelves are super strong too. After a long time in the relationship with the storyteller already hanging by a thread due to in-game and out-of-game behavior, like starting to hang out with some very sketchy people and other red flags, like narrating rape even though one of the players getting uncomfortable and arguing that this is a world of darkness, we quit. And this group of friends became my players, and it became a meme among us that plastic shelves are the most indestructible thing on the planet. Okay, I gotta kind of ask, what does hanging out with sketchy people have to do with your Vampire the Masquerade game? Like, sketchy in-game? Because it, as far as I'm aware and as far as I recall, it's a very grimdark universe, and I feel like sketchy's kind of the name of the game here. Or was it due to behaviors that the DM was showcasing that were due to them hanging out with sketchy people? Now, if forced sexual encounters were not talked about as being okay prior to this game start, you should absolutely quit if a storyteller is going to force them on you, especially if it's some sort of weird, fucked up, detailed narration and it, is getting forced on the party in such a way. Being forced to participate in or listen to topics like this in your game is a huge red flag, especially if it's not brought up beforehand, and is a great reason to run away from a table. Personally, I'm glad OP moved on from this, and it looks like the table left the storyteller and they all started playing on their own, so that's cool. We got rid of the bad storyteller. Before we jump into our last story here, I wanted to just chit-chat about some stuff. I am working on a Star Wars 5th edition video. I'm hoping to have that out by the end of July. It's going to talk about how the game runs, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. I'm going to compare it to the Star Wars Fantasy Flight game system, which is one of the other popular systems for that out there right now. I'm going to talk about ways you can play it, how easy it is to set up and stuff like that. So please do be on the lookout for that. I'm super excited to kind of delve into a new series of like RPG based stuff. Also, I stream on Twitch. If you're interested, I would love to hang out with you guys. Links are in the description. I play a variety of games. I am going to be streaming at night throughout the week. I hope to see you guys all there. But let's jump into our last story for tonight. So our last story for the day is going to be from user Wonderful Radish 258, titled "Being a Female DM Means Facing Extreme Misogyny from My Male Players." I have been DMing for about a year now, starting in July of last year. Congrats, OP. At first, I've only had five players, most found from the D&D Discord server. Yes, I know now how much of a mistake that was. And it was on the first day a player was already arguing about the amount of clerics we had, which at the time was only 2. He then asked about shipping rules and asked if sexual encounters had to be consensual or not. I was kind of flabbergasted at the question because in the rules of the campaign, I stated that all ships between characters, be it platonic or romantic, should always be consensual. After a few more incidents from this player, all in 1 hour of each other, I ended up removing them from the campaign after consulting the rest of the players. They all agreed they were uncomfortable with him. Okay, to problem players' credit, at least they asked about shipping rules and if sexual encounters needed to be consensual and did not just like start word vomiting that out into the world. I'm glad OP laid out rules prior regarding shipping. I personally don't have shipping in my games. I'm gonna assume shipping is a broad term of romance. And I don't think my players really would want to do that. But good on OP for at least thinking of this and putting that boundary out there. It sounds mainly like the trash made itself known pretty quickly and they got removed pretty quickly, which is great. Personally, if you're going to have romance in your game, just make sure everybody is okay with it and also make sure you tiptoe around it, ease into it. Personally, my players, when it has come to romance in particular, they are never romancing each other. I have a tendency to play with all male tables, mixture of sexualities. I think they're just more here to have fun and kind of RP, and they're not looking to tell a romantic story. I have had a couple instances where players have wanted to romance NPCs, which I have no issue with, be it like I want to sleep with the barmaid, or be it, hey, I kind of am falling for the shopkeep. I love their character. Let's see what happens. We always keep it simple. I allow the players to go as far as they want with it. We're talking within reason here. I don't want to be, they don't sit there and go ad nauseum about what fan fiction they're writing about, how they are fucking or whatever. But they'll sit there and they'll be like, hey, elf shopkeep, can I take you out on a date? And I'll be like, cool. Do you want to RP that date? Like, flirting back and forth or talking back and forth like dating conversation, or do you want to kind of yada yada, you know? And of course, there'll still be rolls, your persuasion rolls or don't be charming people, charisma checks and stuff like that. But you just make sure your players are comfortable where it goes. And if it ever broaches anything near actual sexual stuff where they'd be like, hey, I think my character would make a move on this person, wonderful. If the NPC would probably be in agreement with that, you two will spend a lovely night together, fade to black. You can write the fan fiction, commission all the art you want after the session. That's great on you. The next few months went by calmly, but another player had to leave for mental health reasons, so I sought out new players in a mutual friend server. I brought in 3 new players, totaling it to 7. Everything went by smoothly for the first session with the newbies until one of the players, we'll just call him Dingle via his old user, started to criticize every single call I would make mid-session. For example, we'd be in a fight and he'd start cutting off other players, putting his character at the center focus while trying to find loopholes to every single scenario I created. It didn't matter whether he was right or wrong in a situation, he would question every single thing. And if he ever didn't get his way, he would make it everybody's problem and either sleep through the session, which ended up happening twice, or would play games on his phone. He'd then get upset about the information he missed, even though he quite literally was the one who stopped listening. He'd get angry, go quiet, and then call me after the session to tell me that he wasn't happy with my choices. I tried my best to accommodate him by explaining my choices, but if I didn't end up bending the knee to him, he'd just go quiet and wait for me to apologize. Don't do that. Don't let people bully you with that shit. This takes time to learn. I'm not like knocking OP here. This kind of shit takes time to learn dealing with bullies. Another male player of mine also slept through some of the sessions and would make misogynistic comments to the female players, either calling them sweethearts, saying something extremely sexual towards them unprovoked, or would ignore half of my explanations about scenes the characters were in. If this is becoming an issue, lay out that all players need to be respectful of the DM and other players. This should not have to be said. This type of shit should be an unwritten rule. But sometimes it helps to let players know, hey, we're watching you. If you act up, your ass is grass. If attendance becomes an issue in a campaign where players are expected to be there week to week, person to have a conversation about meeting these expectations, and if they cannot, they can find a new table. On the side of it where we're talking where somebody's getting pissy and walking out because they're angry about stuff, I understand life happens, you don't feel well, you get sick, etc. But if you're going to sleep through multiple sessions and then complain, you're out. It's on you. Sometimes you do have to take the trash out. It's not a fun part of DMing, but it has to happen sometimes. I am also surprised this relatively new DM took on so many players. 7 is a lot of players. I mean, I too personally took on way too many players in my first campaign that I was trying to seriously DM, and it was way too much. Personally, I think first time DM should only DM for parties about 3 to 5 max. Anything beyond that makes things difficult. Balancing becomes a lot harder. Spotlight time for players becomes more limited. It's more difficult for players to jive and not talk over each other when there's 7 people vying to do something. It's just so much. It can be a lot. Safe to say, after more collaboration with the rest of the players, I decided to give them the boot, which I am extremely relieved about. Maybe I bit off more than I could chew as a first-time DM, but I also feel like I shouldn't have to explain to grown men in their 20s how to behave and what's appropriate and what's not. Sometimes you do. I don't know why. The campaign has been at a halt for 3 months, but I am going to start it back up within a week or so. Hopefully this time around there's less arguing and more dice rolling. I was already opiate to deal with this shit. What is nice about dealing with crap like this is you learn and you know what to look out for. So you're ready when it comes up in game next. If this keeps happening, finding these really shitty players, my suggestions are either find new places to source your players or vet them better. Ask more questions, talk in greater detail about what expectations are, or how they would react if they don't agree with a ruling you've made. Another way to help vet players is to only allow them to maybe play in a one-shot for the first time they play with you instead of just pulling them into the full campaign. That way, if they're being a piece of shit in just a one-shot, you didn't invest all this time setting up a character, NPCs, backstory, yada, yada, yada for them to be in a full campaign. You only wasted time on them for a one-shot. So that's going to be it for me today, everybody. Thank you guys all for hanging out and watching the video. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I love to read all your comments. Check me out on Twitch, please. Be on the lookout for that Star Wars 5e video sometime at the end of this month. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, everybody.